I want to thank Congressman and Subcommittee Chairman Smith for that, and Karen Bass of California, also the ranking member here of this subcommittee. And let me begin by saying what a pleasure it is to see Representative Gao with us today, and not only to welcome him back, but to say that his voice is sorely missed on the Hill here as one who spoke consistently for human rights, for religious freedom. And indeed, that brings us to the subject today. The panel that is here has shown a very real dedication, a lot of expertise here in the subject of human rights. But I think it is absolutely dire today that our Department of State and we in the United States, in the Congress, and in the Senate and the House, managed to express to the government of Vietnam that they're backsliding, they're walking in the wrong direction on religious freedom and freedom of expression, is raising such a serious concern, not only among the international community, but I hear it from Vietnamese Americans. And I saw it firsthand. I have to share with you, in a trip I took to Vietnam, I had an opportunity to talk to some of the religious leaders, including the Venerable Thich Quang Do. But I talked to several who were under house arrest. Now, one of those was subsequently at one of these religious demonstrations and was beaten in such a way as he was permanently injured. And for those of you who follow these human rights cases and follow particularly the case of religious leaders who refuse to bend to the party in Vietnam, and why do they? Well, as explained to me, as shown to me, the Buddhist texts are rewritten by party functionaries so that they are a small fraction of the original text, but the meaning of the text has been changed. And so when the government itself says, well, we have our own new appointed Buddhist leader that we are going to recognize, well, that's because that individual is willing to bend and change the faith. And the question that I have is that when we took Vietnam off of the country of particular concern list, the deal was that the government in Vietnam was going to recognize religious freedom. Now, that means a cessation. That means ending the process of beating religious leaders, who try to speak out for freedom of religion. That means ending the process of seizing church property. That means allowing all faiths to practice. And I'm looking at the 2013 report of the Human Rights Watch. Looking down through that, the conclusion is Vietnam suppresses nearly every human right, from freedom of expression, freedom of association, religious freedom. And I think that as we look at the excessive use of force, not just against religious leaders, but also young kids that want to use the Internet in order to gain access to information, to see the sentencing for those that are involved in any kind of dialogue about freedom of expression, and see them locked away for these long periods of time, to see the functionaries of the government beating people with electric batons to break up protests over any issue, including environmental issues. And this has remained the same for many years, but frankly, it's getting worse. Vietnam, over the first 6 weeks of this year, the government of Vietnam have convicted in show trials 40 dissidents. Now, that means in just less than 2 months, the communist government there has already eclipsed the entire total of last year. That's why these witnesses came here today to speak out. It's because things are regressing in Vietnam. And despite this behavior, Vietnam is actively pursuing a seat at the UN Human Rights Council. Do words have no meaning? And in terms of the trafficking issue, which Chris Smith has been involved in for so many years, to hear the individual stories, to hear the complicity of the government of Vietnam doesn't want these stories to surface about what's actually happening to these trafficked victims. And that, indeed, is why, if you complain to the government, you might find yourself in worse shape than if you just suffer through. And the government makes money, in so many cases, off of the abuse of workers. But for the trafficking victims, it is really hell. Their life is a life that no one would ever want to go through. We have got to have the U.S. government stand up for moral principle here. Now, the State Department is heading over to Vietnam for the next round of talks in the U.S.-Vietnam Human Rights Dialogue. And during those talks, I hope that these cases that we discussed today, I hope that our government here in the United States makes it absolutely clear, if Vietnam is serious about pursuing a stronger relation with the United States, well, that's contingent on it starting with one thing for certain, and that is the human rights situation has got to be improved in terms of religious freedom, in terms of these trafficked victims, and in terms of freedom of expression for these young people in Vietnam who want to simply have a dialogue. We can't have these show trials. We can't have this kind of abuse. We can't have these beatings. It must end. It must end now, and I commend the Chairman for holding this hearing, and I yield back.